Welcome to Keeping Up at the Capitol with Senator Tom Casperson. This program comes to you each month from Lansing to keep you informed on issues important to the UP. This month, Senator Casperson discusses the Department of Natural Resources, its policies, and their impact on the Upper Peninsula with DNR Director Keith Creagh. And now, let's join Senator Casperson and his guest.
Before we get started, Director, maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit to our viewers and explain a little bit of your connection, like a little bit about your past and maybe some connections you might have to the Upper Peninsula.
Sure, Senator. I appreciate it. First, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and it's certainly is an honor and privilege to do this. So, as you know, I'm an ag background guy, and I spent a career with the Michigan Department of Agriculture. When the governor was elected, I came back to be ag director, and I was just having a riot. It was a lot of fun, and then last July, he said to me, boy, I'd like to move over to DNR. Rodney Stokes was willing to do some of the city stuff, which is a heavy lift. And I said, boy, what a great opportunity. And it's a great opportunity, a couple things. One is, you know, I didn't grow up as an FFA kid. I grew up as a scout. So I did the Eagle Scout. I started hunting, fishing, and with family and traveling when I was 10. Been in every state but Hawaii. We used to, camp all over the state. And so I got a real passion for hunting, fishing, trapping, canoeing, kayaking, skiing, and so I do a lot of that. And then I spent my formative years at Michigan Tech. So that's one of those schools you either love or hate, and I loved it. And so being out in the woods and in the Upper Peninsula, it's a great spot to be.
Good. So if I got this right, I do a lot of Eagle Scout awards in my district. So your name can be mentioned as one of our leaders that actually is an Eagle Scout.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, actually that's something I'm real proud of. I became an Eagle Scout. I was 13 years old, and as you know, that means you spend a lot of time outdoors.
One of the things maybe we could talk about, because I know there was a lot of interest in the Upper Peninsula for sure on this, but the severance tax, the mining issue, how that all unfolded, you clearly played a clear role in that. You kind of took a leadership position, pulling everybody together at a time when, it was a little tense. People were concerned. You're dealing with a lot of money, so clearly people pay attention. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience there, what happened in your eyes, and kind of where we started and where we ended up and how good that is for the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah, well, first, to start out with the whole land-based industries, whether it's forestry, mining, or agriculture, the governor of the administration highly supportive of those industry. I mean, this state's been built on that, and you look at the potential to put people back to work, run regional economies, that's important. UP has a great mining history and heritage. And so the previous tax structure was you had to estimate the ore value, estimate how many days you'd be mining, estimate what came out of the ground, and then try to figure out what a simple and fair tax structure would be. So the administration felt that we should move to a severance tax structure. I really appreciate Chairman Pello at the time, her leadership, bringing along the Marquette County Board of Commissioners. She did a great job. You did a great job providing leadership, making sure the right people were in the room. And when you sit down with the mines and the local individuals and the state policymakers, you get pretty good policy. And we change it significantly based upon the input. How do you ramp up? How do you ramp down? How do you make sure mines are in business over the long haul? How do you make sure that communities have a predictable tax structure? And so I think we got to that. And then we were able to develop a rural development fund where some of the proceeds go into that so that long term we'll have an infrastructure in place where you can get some competition and some support for regional economies.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I was in the beginning when I was back in the House on this whole mining issue, and one of the criticisms of the mines and having mines was the fact that they come in, they extract the ore, they make their profit, and they leave. And certainly that's a lot different than what we have today is a lot different with reclamation and everything else. But the other side of that was this implication that they didn't really benefit our community, they just benefited the company themselves, few jobs for a short period of time. But the Economic Development Fund changed the dynamics of that, and that was something that you and the governor and others worked on. How will that impact us? Because I think it really has a good impact on us.
Right. Well, I think if you look at success indicators in communities, you can look at a couple different things. One is energy, one is education, one is what's your infrastructure. Michiganders can compete across the world as long as they have that access. And so the Rural Development Fund will really talk about how do we invest in the infrastructure to make sure we have long-term success. As you know, in some places in the Upper Peninsula, they have high stranded costs. They don't have appropriate energy. You can't expand because you're limited by energy. Maybe we ought to look at some energy policy, and this will help us do it. We ought to look at roads and bridges and rail. We got to figure that out. We got to figure out how do you make sure you're connected through the internet. It's tough to do business internationally if you can't communicate. So that's really what that does.
So it leaves, in a sense, the goal will be to leave a legacy behind, a good one, with infrastructure and improvements to our entire community, meaning the Upper Peninsula being the community, when mining operations shut down, and they will eventually someday. Is that fair?
That's exactly right. Yeah, well said.
The other subject, probably pretty near and dear to the Upper Peninsula right now, and I know again you've played a key role in this thing, and that's the wolf issue. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that and get us an update as to where we're at. It was a little bit more difficult than I thought it was when we started down this path. I thought because of the problems we're faced with up in the UP that I didn't see it as a problem, but a lot of outside groups and people inside the state, but a lot of outside groups have really weighed in on this thing. Kind of surprised me a little bit.
Well, as you know, the voters in 1996 voted that they wanted to do scientific game management through Proposal G, 2-to-1 margin.
Yep.
And so to try to run ballot initiatives to look at scientific game management, we've already talked about that, and the citizens have spoken. So I am critical of that effort. That's one. Two is ballot box biology doesn't work in complex issues. We do have wolves in the UP. There are human, livestock, and wolf conflict. We did put together the Wolf Forum. The Wolf Forum, which had everyone from HSUS to hunters, fishers, trappers, outdoors individuals, agreed that hunters ought to be part of the solution in a targeted manner to reduce those conflicts. So the roadmap that the Wolf Forum set out was determine numbers through surveys, look at the lethal and non-lethal intervention methods that are currently being used, do government-to-government negotiations with the tribes because the wolves are a special spot in tribal history, then go through a public hearing process, and then take it back to what it is now would be the Wolf Advisory Council. I think that that's a fair process. So to run a ballot initiative, I think is unwarranted and at best premature at this point in time. So we support scientific game management in this state.
I would agree. Could we just talk for a second, and I don't need to have details, I know that's a negotiated thing between the department and the tribes, but maybe just could we talk for a second about the tribes? I actually met with some of the tribes, tried to understand the sensitivity here and be respectful because this is something pretty important to them. But maybe if you could just explain the structure and how that works when you talk about intergovernmental conversations. A lot of people probably don't understand that. They assume we just sit down with the tribes and negotiate something and get it worked out. But I know there's a little more to it than that.
Well, absolutely. Tribes are sovereign nations, and we need to be very respectful and have that conversation with the tribes. The tribes were part of the Wolf Forum. They were at the table. What many people don't understand is we are currently killing wolves now. USA Wildlife Services, we contract with them to shoot wolves. So at the end of the day, whether it's hunters in a targeted manner, reduce wolf populations, or whether we pay wildlife services to do that, the end result is very similar. And I would submit that the North American game model, management models, never failed. The Endangered Species Act has failed. Many acts have failed, but managing a species according to the North American model, the species has always benefited and never failed. So if you want to respect the wolf, if you want to manage it properly, I would say we do it according to the North American game model as opposed to trying to utilize other reduction means and methods.
Sure. Another issue, maybe we could talk a little bit about it. It does affect the Upper Peninsula, but it's really a statewide issue, and you're going to, again, play a key role in this, and that is the dredging of our harbors and the maintenance of the harbors around the entire state. Seems to be a problem. We've got low levels with the Great Lakes. I think there's been a little bit of a lack of dredging, not to blame anybody, it's just money, resources, those type of things, but it's kind of accumulating into a pretty major problem as we speak. So maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the solutions.
Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. There's great leadership coming out of the Senate, so I appreciate that. I appreciate your interest in it. Michigan has a safe harbor of refuge program that allows people ingress and egress off the Great Lakes. You're not supposed to be more than 15 miles from safe harbor. That's critical. And so we actually surveyed those individuals. There's 83 public harbors We had 82% response to our surveys, and they basically said we can't get in and out. And so both you have human health and safety, but you also have the regional economy aspect. So we're working with the harbors of refuge and also those high asset recreation harbors, if you will, to make sure that we can get boaters on and off the lake. You're exactly right. The Corps used to do dredging. It's tied up in Congress. There's $1.5 billion a year that goes in, and they're not using it for dredging. So we are trying to work with our congressional delegation. Congressman Benishik has sent some letters and some resolutions, appreciate his activity at the national level. And so if we can get our federal partners to solve some problems. The governor put $21.5 million in our budget as a supplemental to move it right now so we can start dredging, so we can solve some of these problems. It's significant. Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair down 16 inches over last year. Lake Erie's down 21 inches. And that's significant. So we need to help those public marinas and the private marinas that are out there so that they stay in business.
Something just so the viewers understand, and I really appreciate this, because the governor, yourself, your leadership is not just sitting back waiting for an answer from the Army Corps. We are being proactive and moving forward. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, and in fact about $5.6 million worth of the work is really Army Corps work to do. We'll send the federal government a bill so we can get paid.
Sure, but we got to get it done.
We just have to, it's not a finger pointing exercise. It really is roll up your sleeves and let's solve a problem.
Yeah. The next issue I'd like to talk to you about, for the viewers that know me, understand in the past I've had some questions concerning the Department of Natural Resources, and I've really enjoyed working with you. And I think one of the things I've enjoyed is you've told me no at times, but you've always come with an answer and explained why, and so I think we've had a pretty good relationship that way. But you recently did something that I haven't made a lot of comments towards the DNR in a positive way a lot of times, and you've given me an opportunity to do that, and I want to thank you for that. But maybe talk to us a little bit about what happened. It's a small issue in the big scope of things, but a big issue for the Upper Peninsula and for the folks that live up there, and that was with Newberry, with this whole land issue. We went through the land cap, but you did something for those folks up there that I just met with them actually not too long ago, and they were very appreciative, asked me to pass that on to you.
Well, thanks. A couple things. You know, as you were one of the primary leaders and drivers on the land cap bill, that actually is the right question to ask. As I came over as DNR Director, the governor said, Keith, how many acres should we own in this state? It's no different than the question that Senator Casperson was asking. So the governor's charged the DNR to come up with a comprehensive land use strategy to figure out what's the purpose. And so there's a reason we're third in the nation in hunting and fifth in fishing, and that's because we have public land, public access. However, having said that, we need to figure out the whys and how can we actually help individuals. Some might say in some of the counties where we have high ownership, there's high unemployment. Now there's a whole variety of reasons for that. As you know, 52% of the 4.6 million acres was tax reverted. But that's not to say that we don't need to be good partners. So very specifically in Newberry, the airport needed to expand. And they were landlocked by state land. I think we need to be a good neighbor. If you can expand, if you can provide additional services to your residents, I think the state needs to be full partners. And as a government, we don't need to sell our land to another government. It's taxpayer dollars. Actually, taxpayers don't care who owns the land, as long as you have the access to it and you can accomplish what you do. So as we did, there was a project up there, Chris Point, and as we do that, we ought to make sure then that we're also disposing of some of our land to the benefit of the local community. So one of the things I'm doing as part of the land plan is I am meeting with those counties where we own the most land, the 10 counties where we own the most land, saying here's our portfolio, here are the trails, here are the boat launches, here are the parks, here are the state forest lands. How can we help be economic drivers in those regional economies? And that hasn't always been the behavior of the department.
Yeah, and I think that kind of hits on another point, and that is the fact that you're reaching out to the locals, getting their input. In the past, I think, through a lot of years, not just recent past, but for a lot of years, I think they felt a little bit disenfranchised that the state's moving in its direction, we got to deal in ours. But that was one of the things they also mentioned, is that having you talk to them and find out what their plans are.
Well, and that's one of the things the governor in his energy and environment message, and also now the Natural Resources Trust Fund Board says that for all projects, before we buy land, we need to have a resolution of support from local units of government saying this is good for the community, because it all looks good from Lansing. But we really need to make sure that, as the youth leave the state, we'd like to keep them in the state. And I think we can do that around some of the natural resource issues. So we'll be good neighbors.
Let's talk a little more about land. You mentioned the land cap. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how are we doing, what are we moving forward with. We've got recreational use, we've got industrial use, we've got set-asides, things that should be preserved and protected. How do you see that all coming together?
Yeah, actually, I think that there's great agreement on there are some gems in the state that need to be set aside and protected and preserved. Tequamatum Falls, Porcupine Mountain State Park. I mean, people know it. It's like beauty. You know it when you see it.
Yep.
And there are those areas. However, having said that, the forestry industry, for instance, $14 billion industry, 26,000 jobs. So we need to pay attention to that. So if there's a power line that needs to run from, into Escanaba to assist New Page, we need to make sure that you can run that on state land, that we're good neighbors, and we can do some of that. So I think what you'll find is it'll be more purpose-driven. If you need access to the Great Lakes, access to some of our trout streams, if you need trail connectors, I think those are good investments. I think large blocks of land just to hold them, I think we need to think about that before we go down that road too much farther.
Sure. Let's shift gears a little bit. You've taken on a pretty tough issue here with the license fees. I was in the House and we went through this. It didn't go that well, but you've taken it on again, and I think you've come up with some pretty good ideas here. And I'm hearing from the sportsmen and the community out where I come from that they're listening. Again, I think you've presented it very well. I don't know completely where we're at and what the final thing will look like, but maybe you could share a little bit of what you're trying to do.
Sure. Well, first of all, I won't take full credit for this. Actually, we've been good listeners with our stakeholders, and so, as you know, the license package hasn't been raised since 1997, and we can talk about the erosion in the buying power of the dollars, but that's really not it. I mean, we have our current programs, we have our current funding sources, and so that's what our sportsmen and women and stakeholders get. Current program, everyone knows what that is. As we went out to stakeholders, they said a couple things. We'd like to see things different. We'd like to see some more empowerment with some of our stakeholders. We'd like to have better partnerships. We'd like to see habitat improvement. We'd like to see increase in hatcheries. We'd like to see a different model as we move forward. So a couple things. One is we had 227 different types of licenses. That's too many. We ought to be able to go out and enjoy natural resources and reduce confusion. So we actually pared down the 227 back to 31. Actually, it was a little bit less than that, but we needed to do some discounts, and so the idea is there's three types of fishing license. One's a $15 one-day license, one's a $25 all-species license, and one's a $75 if you're a non-resident yearly license. So I can say $25, go fish. And I was listening to a fellow on the radio this weekend, and if you are trolling your Rapala in a lake, actually the trout doesn't know if you got your license or not. So that makes sense. It makes sense to me. We ought to be able to do that. And just for the viewers, it's we maintain a 60% discount for seniors, and we also, if you're 100% disabled veteran or an active military service person, you hunt and fish in this state for free, and that's the least we can do for that. On the hunting side, we reduced the small game licenses from 15 to 10. We call it a base license, so you can shoot waterfowl, migratory birds, and any small game species. That gives me a direct relationship with every licensed hunter, and that takes the confusion out of the system for federal cost-sharing dollars, as you're aware of. Then on top of that, we did say $20 for a deer, individual deer, right? Whether it's antlered or antlerless. And then it's a $5 application for the draw species. So it's, and for elk, we left, that's $100. Wolves, if we have a hunting season, will be $100. Moose, if we ever have a hunting season, will be $100. $15 to trap, and $15 shoot a turkey. So it really is a simplification. But it does generate about $18 million in additional revenues for the department. And we've worked with the stakeholders, and we very specifically said this is how we'll spend our money. And we need to do that for transparency. Dollars are precious, and if we ask someone to invest in us, we need to make sure we have a return.
One of the things that I learned, I did a drive along a while back with one of the DNR officers. I didn't realize how confusing it can be because of the funding mechanism for our COs. It is confusing, and is that something we're trying to shoot for, to try and fix a little bit of that so they can go do their job instead of have to follow the money in a sense?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, as you're aware, the governor actually put in his budget some general fund to help support conservation officers. So we're going to try to broaden our revenue streams first. Second is, we have 31 different restricted revenue accounts, and it's very prescriptive on how you spend that money. So we do have officers doing low priority projects because that's where their funding stream comes from. One of the things I noticed as I came over from agriculture, we had 208 different commodities in this state. We used to fight a lot. But when we came out of the room, we were Michigan agriculture. Natural resources is a little different. We still identify around the species. So I'm still a grouse person, I'm still whitetail, I'm a sturgeon, you're a steelheader, I'm a walleye. Wait, I do turkeys. And by doing that, not being uniform in nature, that causes us some problems. Now that's developed because the department hasn't always been transparent, in my opinion. So if we increase transparency and trust at the stakeholder level, and there's lots of technology, lots of reporting, we should be able to assure that. We should be able to move it ahead. And that's one of the things that we did propose in the fee package, is a 5-year sunset. So to the stakeholders, give us 5 years, see if we make a difference. If not, that'll be time to review the fees and ratchet them back if you don't feel you're getting your return on your investment.
Good point. You, when you were mentioning some of the things, how this works, I was, not too long ago, I was at a meeting up in the UP with some sportsmen, and quite a few people attended. Maybe you could share with our viewers how you as a department deal with it, because I chuckled a little bit as the sportsmen themselves were interacting about, I believe at that point they were talking about deer and buck versus doe and antlerless and 3 on the side, and it was a lot of issues, and I noticed they were struggling to come to a consensus. So when you manage how we're moving forward and you interact with the NRC and all those moving parts, how do you do that?
Well, it's the old story about the guy who found a bottle on the beach, and Genie came out, and they happened to be over by Traverse City. He said, I'd like to have a 4-lane road going over Green Bay because I go over to Wisconsin all the time. Guy says, that's not possible. Now, how about your second wish? He said, well, can you explain the deer management philosophy from DNR? So he said, well, how big do you want and how much concrete do you want in that bridge? So it is complicated, and sometimes we try one size fits all, and I'm not quite sure that's the right way to do things. So as we proceed, as you know, I was at some of those meetings myself, and so there's questions about the youth hunt. Is a youth hunt, should we limit that to doe hunting, for instance, and not allow them to shoot a buck early on in the season? Should you look at antler point restriction? So that's really where we need to engage the stakeholders. There will not be consensus or unanimity of opinion, but I think that we can get to a spot where we can have a fluid system so we can try some different things in different areas and get general agreement.
Yeah, I like that approach. One of the things that we've got going, I know you and I have talked about it quite a bit, but maybe give us some thoughts on the whole idea of the trail systems in the state. It's broad. There's a lot of multi-use going on, where we might be able to share, where we absolutely shouldn't be sharing.
Well, that's an unfair question because the guy who's leading the trail effort's asking it, but I'll give you my opinion. I think one is, as a department, we can do a better job facilitating the conversation about trails and where do they go. And sometimes we have trails that go one way and they really don't go to any place in particular. As I ride trails, I actually like to eat. I like to get off a machine and sleep. And so we need to figure out how do we loop trails better. That's one. Two is there's multiple use on those trails, and we need to figure that out. As we were talking earlier today, if there's snow, then you have snowmobiles, and if not, then you have ORVs. Well, how do you actually get that capacity and build that capacity? The governor said in his energy and environment message, we want to be the #1 trail state. So we have to align our policies and practices to do that. And then last, I would suggest that historically, we didn't always try to maximize riding on state land, not at the detriment of the resource, but at the betterment of human health and safety. And so there are times when we can keep people on state land a little bit longer, and then work with my good friend Kurt Steidl over at MDOT, figure out where those pinch points are, and work on the ingress and egress into town. And I think we can do that, and that's one thing you'll find us, as part of that land plan, it'll be regionally based, we'll have regional experts, and then we'll try to, in a more strategic process, figure out how we connect communities with the resource, and that's by way of trails.
It is. Maybe we could talk just a little bit about, we talked a lot about different budgets, but maybe we could expand on that a little bit. I know in the department a lot of what you deal with is restricted funds. For the viewers, maybe you could explain a little bit how that works.
Yeah.
It's just not that easy to go access that money.
Right, so all money's not necessarily green, although it looks green.
Yeah.
And as a department, we're at over $300 million. That's a lot of money. About 6% of it is general taxpayer dollars. And so if you say that we have $17 million, it's actually for citizens of this state, if you take 10 million people, 365 days in a year, it's about a half a penny a person that actually goes into the department a day from general taxpayer dollars. General taxpayer dollars allow you to spend things on priorities, not on specific projects. And so other than that, it's been the sportsmen and women of this state that fund the department. And so make no mistake about it, we are user fee, and we either get our money from the feds, we get it from the sportsmen and women, we get some out of some of the royalties, off of state land, some of the timber harvest that occurs. And each one of those activities then dictate what you can do with that money. So what the governor did is he did put some additional general fund in to broaden the base so that those that are using the resource outside of those that pay license fees are actually supporting the department. That's the first time that's happened in recent memory. So I appreciate that support out of the governor's office. And then secondly is, how do we actually take some of the restricted revenue out of license fees, make sure that we're good partners so that we can do stream bank or habitat improvement or upland game bird management and put upland game species trails together. And then lastly, what I talk about a little bit is trying to see if we can expand that rec passport a little bit. Rec passport's been a great success. It's $11. As you know, it's around 27% of the vehicles have that. But I think there's some opportunities to expand that just a bit, so some of the other users of public lands might be able to help share in that opportunity to support the resource.
Yeah, which makes sense. We hear that a lot. Real quick, we're running out of time, but I have to ask you one question. Recently I had an opportunity to fly in a DNR plane, and when they were going to go up and do some of their counts with the moose, and it was an experience I'll never forget. I had a ball. I'm glad I was able to go, but I survived it, I'll give you that. And I would dare say you don't pay those pilots and those counters enough money, but the big question is, have you ever been up in the plane?
I have not been in a wildlife plane. I've been in a spotter plane for spray operations, so it's a little bit similar to that, but let the record show we did bring you back, Senator.
You did bring me back safe. The stomach was a little queasy, but boy, there's something else what they can accomplish up there.
That's exactly right. And we use those planes also, as you know, for fire control. And that's one reason why we have a pretty effective forest fire control program in the Upper Peninsula.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Director, for showing up and being with the Upper Peninsula, folks in the Upper Peninsula, and we really appreciate your time.
It's always a great day in the UP, so I appreciate being here. Thanks.
Thank you.